Hi, my name is Liz Corey, and I lead HR here at Velosio. Today, we are going to be talking about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, and it's centered around the role of business leaders in creating a culture of inclusion and diversity, and how you can go about doing that. To me, an inclusive work environment is a culture and a workplace where all employees feel valued, respected, and supported, regardless of their background or personal characteristics. So at Velosio, we really feel that that is centered around creating a culture where everyone feels they belong and are celebrated, and a culture that is fair and where everyone feels like they have equal opportunity. This is so important because it truly is a business imperative. Having an inclusive work environment and an environment where everybody feels like they belong truly helps attract and retain top talent, helps improve bottom line productivity as well as innovation, because those diverse perspectives can really lead to new ideas and solutions. It enhances your client satisfaction. I think, again, here at Velosio, we really do feel that diversity and inclusion initiatives are not only a business imperative for us, but for our customers as well. And so it really helps us meet the need of our diverse customers, which in turn leads to customer satisfaction and loyalty. And I think last but certainly not least, I do have to say that, this is important because it does help mitigate legal and reputational risks. So any type of discrimination or harassment in the workplace can lead to repercussions. And that's certainly not the reputation that any of us want to have. I do love this question, and I'm going to answer it maybe in a way that isn't traditional. I believe that diversity and inclusion extends well beyond the statistics. So, in a typical environment, you measure your statistics, your participation rate, your ratios, and that's very, very important to do. But I really do think to create that welcoming environment for employees of all backgrounds, the first thing that needs to be done is defining and communicating company values, right? And those values truly emphasizing that belonging and diversity, inclusion, and equity are an important value for the organization. So that's paramount, and we do quite a bit of that here at Velosio. Next, it's really about intentionally doing things to foster an inclusive culture. And I'm going to emphasize the word intentional. So really things like celebrating diversity through events, sharing of perspectives, asking for feedback, creating recognition programs that everyone can participate in. I think, again, another great thing to be able to do. Next is providing education, right? Really educating team members and leaders on important topics such as unconscious bias, cultural competencies, inclusive leadership practices, so that fairness becomes a part of your culture and a part of your values. I think that's paramount for many companies today, since many companies like Velosio are global in nature, and we've got to have that cultural competency to create that culture where people can bring their true selves and thrive. And I do think last, definitely not least, is monitoring progress by asking and listening. Right? It's tracking those metrics that I mentioned earlier. It is doing engagement surveys, doing pulse surveys, listening to people, really understanding that employee engagement, and then relating it to the turnover rates and how that impacts different populations of people. Some common barriers to building a more inclusive work environment include a few key things. The first barrier is a genuine lack of diversity at all levels. I think having that level of diversity is really important, and it does become a barrier if that's not present. Next is unconscious bias. That is a significant barrier to building an inclusive work environment. Um, Next would be resistance of change, or what I would define as not acting, not focusing on diversity because there's a perception that there's not a problem. We're fine. We don't do anything like that here. Um, Next is just again related to unconscious bias is the lack of awareness and understanding for how people are different, how that shows up in the workplace, what can be done about it. We talk a lot about psychological safety, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. But I think that level of empathy can sometimes be missing, and that does create a barrier that needs to be overcome. And last is ineffective policies and practices. So if the policies and practices aren't audited to ensure fairness, to ensure that unconscious bias isn't present, to ensure that people are all treated the same, that could be a barrier to building a more inclusive work environment. One, putting it on the agenda is really important. Ensuring that discussing diversity, creating inclusion, we lead at Velosio with belonging. We want to create an environment where everybody feels they belong. And that's a topic that we actively discuss, and I encourage others to discuss it as well. I think next is business leaders can certainly overcome this by focusing on unconscious bias, by focusing on training and development, so that they can recognize and mitigate their own biases. And I think last, another way to overcome this is to create a strategy. What does the strategy look like for our organization? And what does it look like for your organization? Make it purposeful, make it intentional. And then last is overcoming these barriers by really reviewing all of your policies and practices, making sure that they truly are inclusive, making sure that they don't exclude anybody is another great way to overcome those barriers. Building your culture actually starts with attracting candidates and the recruitment and hiring processes. So that part of that belonging and diversity strategy has to start with talent acquisition. I think first and foremost, it's imperative that your job descriptions are inclusive, that there's the right language in there that speaks to everybody, that there's language in there that ensures the company that somebody is applying to is inclusive and is diverse. I think next, you really need to look at to advertise your openings in locations that attract diversity, and making sure that you're eliminating bias from your application process, that the application process is easy for everyone, regardless of whether or not you're accessing that application from a phone, a tablet, a computer, that it's quick and simple for people to apply, and that you're not excluding anybody through that application process. I think next, it's really, really critical that interviews are conducted in an inclusive way, that we're evaluating each and every candidate the same, using the same criteria, and doing debrief sessions the same for each and every candidate. And I think last, it really does go to promoting diversity and inclusion internally, and showing, I'm going to keep going back to that, showing that you're creating a culture that values diversity, encourages employees to refer qualified candidates from diverse backgrounds. So that's really how this can extend to the recruitment and hiring process. Yeah, I'll extend on that a little bit. I did talk to looking to advertise your openings in locations that attract diversity. And that's to making sure that you're targeting specific pools of talent. So advertising on LinkedIn and advertising in on Indeed is great because those are open to everybody, but really targeting locations, for example, that have a population of women or have a population of Black people. Our campus recruiting strategy, for example, does extend to historically Black colleges and universities. So making sure that you're getting the word out in a variety of places, not just traditional job posting sites. Business leaders can address unconscious bias in the workplace through training and education. I think it's really important to understand that it centers around building awareness. Unconscious bias is just that, unconscious. So if unconscious bias is present, typically the person isn't even aware of that. So what do we do to build that awareness? And it centers around education and training. That's first and foremost. Next, it also centers around building that self-awareness. Having your leaders, having your team members, having your hiring teams understand themselves, and the self-awareness that they bring to the hiring process. I think next, it's ensuring that performance management processes are fair. Um, Making sure that everybody can apply for a job internally, making sure that all reviews are conducted the same, making sure that everybody's having those regular one-on-ones with their team members. And some things that we've already discussed, right? So, how do you address those unconscious biases? Recruitment and hiring, for one, all of your diversity inclusion initiatives, and then again, the associated training and education in each of those areas. Business leaders can foster open and honest communication. I do believe that communication is the cornerstone to culture and the cornerstone to diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. I often like to say, if you see something, say something. If you don't feel comfortable, speak up. We want to promote that type of environment where everyone feels that they're safe to speak up, that they're safe to communicate, that if they do communicate, that they won't be met with judgment. And there's lots of trends now around psychological safety in the workplace. Can I bring my whole self to work? Can I share, what I've done on a weekend? Because I may have done it with my partner, in an untraditional way. Are people going to lead with empathy and seek to understand? Again, circling back to that open and honest communication also centers around encouraging active listening, right? Not brushing people off when they want to share, not not discarding opinions, letting people share their opinions, asking for those opinions, and then employing active listening. And I think that leads to providing channels for feedback, making sure that people have a way that they could give feedback, one-on-one to their manager, to HR, to leadership. And if they're truly not comfortable, doing it through a survey format, and then really reading those results, making sure that there are questions in there about diversity and inclusion when you do your engagement surveys, listening to what people have to say, and then formulating strategies to improve those scores, whatever they might be. I do like to say that today's environment and building a culture, especially a diverse and inclusive culture, not one size fits all. So it's about meeting people where they're at, listening, and obtaining that feedback. I'd like to add two additional things. I think next, it's around cross functional collaboration. That really allows us to have that diversity of thought. And then the most important thing for everybody is to lead by example, right? Admit your mistakes. Understand where, hey, maybe I haven't done something correctly, but I do want to listen and I do want to lead by example. And it's been an interesting environment that we're in today. So the steps that business leaders could take to ensure, that their company continues to build that more inclusive work environment is first, have a strategy, have a plan on the page, and continually assess progress to that strategy, whether it be through data, statistics, and analysis, or through feedback, surveys, and active listening. Really important to have that strategy and continually assess progress. To continue to expand on diversity initiatives and not let it fall off the agenda. Celebrate people. Again, without letting that topic of diversity and inclusion fall from the agenda. And then staying up to date on trends and best practices. I think one of the things that I'm noticing is over the past few years, it's been a trend to have a diversity and inclusion manager or director on staff to ensure that all of these things are happening. And I think one of the most important trends that we're starting to see is that companies are realizing that it shouldn't be another thing that we're doing or having additional person to do this, but it should be woven into everything that we're doing. So rather than it being something extra or having an extra person, it should just be part of our culture and what we're doing. And so I'm seeing some trends to bringing that back to not being an additional thing, but to being part of everything. I think it's important to know that this is a very important topic, not only in business for all the reasons that we've already spoken about, but it's very important to Velosio. And we take this topic very seriously. We've got an active diversity and inclusion strategy in place that centers around belonging. We celebrate our people. And if anybody has any questions for me or anyone at Velosio about this topic or about any of our services, please reach out. We're happy to engage with you and to answer your questions.